Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today to our side event on disability inclusive support systems, promoting economic security and poverty reduction, which is co-sponsored by Canada, the United Kingdom, Singapore, and the Ford Foundation. My name is Krista Wilcox, and I'm the Director General of the Office for Disability Issues with the Government of Canada, and I'm pleased to be moderating this session today and look forward to our discussion. Please note that this session is also being webcast on UN Web TV. Welcome to everybody who's watching on this platform. Online in the room, we also have captioning, and we also have American Sign Language available for those that require it. Unfortunately, I do have to make an announcement around one of our panelists. Unfortunately, Minister Carla Qualtrough, the Minister for Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion, sends her regrets as she had to go back to Ottawa on an urgent basis for a very important issue this afternoon that's taking place in the House of Commons that we're all very excited about for good reasons. So I send her regrets on her behalf today. I'm going to start by welcoming our panelists. Today we have with us Alicia Ram, who is the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Income Security and Social Development at Employment and Social Development Canada. We have the United Kingdom's Minister for Disabled People, Health and Work, Ton Pursglove. And we have the Senior Parliamentary Secretary, Eric Chua, Singapore's Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, and Ministry of Social and Family Development. And we also have with us Ms. Rebecca Coakley, Program Officer with the Ford Foundation, and Ms. Carly Fox, who is on the Canadian delegation as a youth delegate. Thank you all for joining us today. It's my great pleasure to start with our first speaker, and we're going to begin with Minister Pursglove, and I give the floor over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And can I just start by thanking you and everybody on the panel for the collaborative efforts that have been put into making this really important event happen this afternoon. And I'm really sorry that Minister Qualtrough can't be here this afternoon, but I entirely understand the pressures, it is fair to say, of ministerial life, and particularly of legislative change and requirements on the floor of the House. And it's fair to say that we are in a very similar position in the United Kingdom, going through significant welfare reform changes at the moment. And so I have real sympathy for the importance of that work, and I hope that we will do this justice in her absence. And I also just want to welcome the partnership, really, that speaks to this event, obviously with the Canadian government, with the Singapore government, and of course with the Ford Foundation being an important part of this event too. And I really welcome the chance to share some of the work that we are doing in the United Kingdom, which is very significant, some of which is overwhelming, significant change in our welfare system, the biggest welfare reform in decades. And I think that this marks a significant moment in the work that we are doing domestically to repivot the system. And so it'd be good to be able to set out some of the detail of that and to hear from the various learnings of those who also will speak this afternoon. And one thing that certainly unites all of us is the inclusive vision that we have as national governments. That inclusivity is really important, and that must, of course, feature in every aspect of disabled people's lives. But work is particularly important in all of this, and it goes to the heart of the conversation and the discussions that we will have this afternoon, and the work that we are doing in the United Kingdom as an important enabler in disabled people's lives more generally. And it's important because disabled people tell us that they want to work, to share their skills and talents, and enjoy the benefits that good work has been shown to bring. And we also know that bringing health and work more closely together has a beneficial determinant on many people's life chances and outcomes. And more disabled people being in work means that employers are also better placed to enjoy the competitive advantages of a diverse workplace, including the many talents and varied talents of disabled people. And in the UK, our determination to increase disability employment is linked to a strong belief that no one should be left behind, frozen out of the workplace, or lose their potential simply because they have a disability. Everybody should be able to benefit from the advantage of having a regular pay packet, the resilience that that brings on a day-to-day basis in people's lives, and I think that that's particularly relevant at a time where certainly in Europe cost of living pressures are significant for very obvious reasons. And morally, it is the right thing to do. Work in itself and progression around it is key to raising living standards. And it's also part of having a better informed, more diverse, more inclusive working community. And these reasons account for why this has been a priority for the UK government for some time now. And many employers in the United Kingdom are reaping the benefits directly from the steps that we have been taking. But I want to just underscore the fact that no one government or no government alone can achieve on this agenda. It has to be an inclusive process that involves disabled people, that involves disabled people's organisations, that involves businesses, that involves public services and a whole host of others, and disabled people themselves in particular, in making sure that we tailor the solutions to get this right and that we work in that spirit of partnership at all times. And we are undoubtedly seeing the results of this early work already. In 2017, for example, the UK government set a goal to see 1 million more disabled people in employment between 2017 and 2027. We met that goal 5 years early in 2022, but we can't be complacent. We now need to take the next steps to build on those very strong foundations. And what that directly means is that more disabled people are enjoying the empowerment that work can provide. More people are that step closer to reaching their potential. More businesses are benefiting from the talent and the skills that disabled people undoubtedly bring to the workplace in so many different forms and in so many different fields. In concrete terms, it means that 5.1 million disabled people were in employment in the UK in Q1 of 2023. And this is an increase of 320,000 on the year and an overall increase of 2.2 million in the same quarter in 2014. I would say that all those who've been involved in that journey should be incredibly proud of their efforts. And I particularly want to say thank you for those efforts to employers, to our work coaches who work with us in the Department for Work and Pensions and in our job centres on the ground, to charities, to representative organisations, but most of all to disabled people themselves. But we must go further. And I want to help as many disabled people to start, stay and succeed in work. And I think often that retention point, when you read media reports in relation to employment, is often missed. There is often a significant focus on work starts, not enough on retention, and the retention piece is equally as important as the work starts piece. So we recognise that we need to go further and we need to break down the barriers that hinder people, disabled people, getting into the workplace, but actually people in general in getting into the workplace, including people with short-term health conditions, and blowing apart the remaining negative perceptions, presumptions, or stereotypes. And that means providing disabled people with the right support in the right place at the right time. Candidly, it means expecting more of employers to be more inclusive and empowering them to know how to best support those who need additional help, but not be so prescriptive that the voice of the disabled person is not heard in that conversation. This needs to be done in partnership, and we need to empower good conversations, good quality workplace conversations to understand what people's needs are, and then to work with people to understand what reasonable adjustments might be required, what changes to working practices can perhaps be made, and to not only deliver work starts, but to deliver that retention piece, but then go further and deliver progression within work. And it means also ensuring our government systems work together to better support good work outcomes for disabled people, focusing on what people can do rather than focusing far too much on what people can't do. And I would accept very honestly that for too long in the United Kingdom there's been too much of a focus on what people can't do rather than on what they can. One of the reasons that we're reforming the system is to do away with the work capability assessment that requires people to prove that they're not able to work in order to receive their benefit entitlement. That is a perverse situation, and we are determined that that must not continue for any longer. And with that in mind, I'll talk a little more later about how we're transforming the UK's welfare system to focus on what people can do rather than what they can't through our recently published white paper. And I'm proud, actually, of the various government initiatives supporting disabled people and employers in the UK, including in our job centres, we're increasing work coach support for people with health conditions receiving out-of-work benefits and providing specialist disability employment advisors to offer advice and expertise on how to help disabled people move into work. What that means in practice is supporting our entire job centre network to be better informed and better equipped to support disabled customers and people with health conditions to upskill their level of knowledge and their capabilities to do that, but also where there is a particular need to have intervention from additional qualified and able individuals who've got that specialist expertise and knowledge for that to happen. So we don't just see this as a reactive process. We want this to be quite an iterative and proactive process as well, that upskilling as well as that intensive support with individuals. We're also offering employment support programs, providing tailored and personalised support for disabled participants across the board. We have a really important scheme called Access to Work in the UK, which provides grants towards extra costs of working beyond standard reasonable adjustments. In the last few days, we've begun to roll out a new initiative called Access to Work Plus, which we trialled and we analysed and we evaluated. What that is about is taking access to work to a new level, whereby we work with employers where they have a desire to employ a disabled person, working with them collaboratively to try and shape the role to support people to make sure that it is durable and that we then help them to find the right person to take that role and then sustain that employment for the longer term, something I'm very excited about actually in terms of the potential for that based on the conversations that I have. And our Disability Confidence Scheme works very directly with business and with public services, and I think it's important that the UK government leads by example on this, and our government departments, our level 3 accredited disability confident employers, we must set the standard, we must show leadership on this. And what that does is works with employers to think differently about disability and health and to take positive action to address the issues disabled employees face in the workplace. And I want to deepen that commitment, and that is something that we are proactively looking at the moment to see what more we can do to get more employers signed up to being disability confident, and then to deepen that commitment and progress people through the levels of dedication and commitment to the scheme. And we've also got a new digital information and advice service, providing better integrated and tailored guidance to employers on supporting health and disability in the workplace. And one of the regular pieces of feedback we received was employers saying, we're just not sure where to find good quality information. It's often disparate. So how can we better bring that together so that there is a one-stop shop almost of being able to find the information that people need? Again, not being too prescriptive, but having that sort of headline signposting to other sources of support to then try and empower employers to have good quality conversations and understanding some of the challenges, some of the barriers and some of the specifics of people's disabilities and the health conditions that others face. And I think, in truth, the thing we now need to concentrate on is how we bring those things more effectively together, how we see the join-up between those schemes, how those schemes interact, and how we try and make that information as accessible as possible and try and present as much of it in one place as we can to arm employers with all the information that they need to try and have those conversations and to be productive in this space, but also to try and harness that commitment and dedication to the schemes that we would hope employers would want to sign up to, and how that should then be a seamless journey to navigate the system. And what helps with that is that the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Secretary of State for Health, my Secretary of State in the Department for Work and Pensions, all have the same vision, and we are working in a very joined-up way, and in a way that I can never recall in my time in the House of Commons. I've been a member of Parliament since 2015. There is a real cross-government focus on this agenda, which I think is very refreshing, very welcome, and it's beginning to pay dividends. because as one of the ministers responsible for a team in the UK civil service that brings together the health and welfare departments, I recognise the importance of work and health systems collaborating and working together along with employers, working constructively to remove barriers for disabled people. And as an example of this, I want to talk to you about one of our most important interventions to support people with depression and anxiety in partnership between the work and health system, where we've placed employment support very directly within mental health talking therapy services. Employment Advisors in NHS Talking Therapies is a voluntary service that enables those that request it to access combined psychological treatment and employment support to help them remain in, return to, if off sick, or find work and improve their mental health. Employment Advisors support clients in NHS Talking Therapies, irrespective of their work situation. People who are looking for work will be given help to improve the quality of their CVs, complete application forms, and improve the quality of their performance in interviews. Employment Advisors work with NHS Talking Therapies clients and their employers to support returns to work following ill health-related absences. This could include providing advice to clients. For example, through suggesting coping mechanisms, empowering them to have better conversations with their colleagues or their manager, or through supporting workplace reasonable adjustments or a graduated return to work in a way that works for the individual and for the employer. Over 1 million people are assessed for NHS Talking Therapies treatment every year, and since 2017 we've tripled the number of employment advisors working alongside therapies, and we fully anticipate that in the coming months we will get to 100% coverage of the scheme in the UK. On World Mental Health Day last October, we announced a cross-governmental programme to deliver 122 million to 2024 to expand employment advisors in NHS Talking Therapies across England. And the recruitment of employment advisors and rollout across England has now commenced. This will see an increase from 40% of NHS Talking Therapy services to 100%, as I've explained. And this means that everyone in England will have employment advisors in NHS Talking Therapies available in their area by 2024-25. And the expansion will allow more people to access both psychological support for their mental health as well as employment advice to move into or progress in work. And it's fair to say that the testimony from service users is very powerful and impactful. And I experienced that for myself when I visited a Talking Therapies service in East London a few months ago, and it was very powerful to hear from the individuals who have been through that scheme, who've sought that support in collaboration with other health treatment that they're experiencing and proper signposting into this, with that collaboration between the NHS and employment advice, I think is very, very powerful and helps to transform people's lives for the better. And with all of that, I've given a flavour of our work, providing the broad framework of our government's approach, but we've no intention of stopping there. And indeed, Transforming Support, the Health and Disability White Paper, published in March 2023, sets out ambitious and extensive reforms to ensure that disabled people have the right support, opportunities and incentives to move into and remain in work. And what we will do is transform the benefit system for the future so that it focuses on what people can do rather than what they can't, step up our employment support for disabled people, and ensure that people can access the right support at the right time and have a better overall experience when applying for and receiving health and disability benefits. And that includes doing away with this structural barrier to work, the jeopardy that people feel about seeking an employment opportunity, getting into that role, it not working out, and then having to go back through reapplication and reassessment processes, which we know is a significant deterrent in people taking that important step that all of us would want to see. And in addition to that, in a more inclusive cross-government way, we've also recently announced that we're developing a disability action plan, which will set out the immediate action the government will take in 2023 and 2024 to improve disabled people's lives, as well as laying the foundations for longer-term change, being responsive to a whole host of different issues that affect disabled people's lives on a day-to-day basis to try and bring about that change in short order and make sure that there is then cultural change in our society and strong foundations from which to build thereafter. And I mentioned that cross-government spirit of collaboration we see, and that was reflected in our recent spring budget announcements, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer came forward and announcing new investment focusing on that work and health join-up. And that included measures that further bring together the health and welfare systems, such as introducing a new supported employment programme known as Universal Support for eligible inactive people, including disabled people with additional barriers to employment, which will match participants with open market jobs and fund support and training. What that really is about is understanding what works, which is again why the opportunities that COSP this week provides is so valuable in understanding what works in other countries and trying to learn from each other. And the IPSPC, individual placement and support in primary care, I know had its origins in the United States, but we have found that to be a very impactful employment measure with a 68% success rate in terms of getting people into work and having durable employment. We are using that as our pioneer for universal support to get us going in that first year of delivery, and we'll then build on that and adapt, and we're very open to conversations about where we could look to take universal support learning from others. We're expanding additional work coach support to provide disabled people with increased one-to-one personalised support from their work coach to help them move towards and into work, including groups who've perhaps not had that opportunity previously but who might want to, and doing that in a really collaborative way that understands people's aspirations and then helps to connect the dots to get the right support for them. That will be rolled out into the final third of our job centres, with the second third having only just gone live a few weeks ago. And we're also piloting integrated work and health support for a Workwell Partnerships programme for disabled people who want help to remain in, return to or take up work. This programme will be locally led, bringing together the NHS, local authorities and other partners in collaboration with job centres. And the focus of that will be on retention and building capacity alongside existing primary care offers within local communities, recognising that different areas have different needs, different circumstances, different landscapes, and we need to therefore be responsive to that on a local level. We're also introducing employment advisors in musculoskeletal conditions pathway services in England, helping individuals with musculoskeletal conditions to return to or remain in employment. And I'm really pleased that we're exploring this particular aspect of our support with yourselves in the Canadian government, which I think is really exciting and something that I'm very keen that we do. And we're also expanding the funding for the forthcoming small and medium-sized enterprise subsidy pilot for occupational health services and launching 2 consultations, one focused on occupational health tax incentives and another on ways to boost UK occupational health coverage. Quite honestly, the situation in the UK at the moment in relation to occupational health just isn't good enough. Large employers, we see about a 92% provision available. That isn't good enough. And many small and medium-sized enterprises do not have similar support in place. In fact, the figure for those businesses is in the high teens. We need to do far better in terms of making that quality provision available for more people, and we will look to back that in various innovative ways by stimulating innovation and then trying to grow that provision and try and cascade that more generally across businesses and employers across our country. And we remain overall committed to reducing the disability employment gap, and will continue to galvanise action across government and work in partnership with health systems, employers and others at national and local level to create the societal changes needed for disabled people to go as far as their talents will take them. But this must never be seen as just a charitable thing to do, but it is the right thing to do, and nobody should be excluded from work opportunities by virtue of disability or health condition. There must always, of course, be a safety net available for those where work isn't appropriate, but we must go forward in the spirit of partnership, an inclusive spirit of partnership, to break down barriers wherever we find them. And with that, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Minister Pursglove. And I'm now going to introduce our next panelist and give the floor to the Senior Parliamentary Secretary for Singapore's Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth and Ministry of Social and Family Development, Eric Chiwa. Please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, big thanks to Your Excellency for that delivery of a very insightful and very incisive sharing. It's a tough act coming after you, because you have gone to such detail with many of the policies and programs that is going on in the UK right now. So a very good afternoon to everyone. Very happy and very honored to be here to participate in today's side event I'm indeed very honored to share a little bit more about Singapore's approach, and hopefully we can learn from one another in our respective experiences. Now, supporting persons with disabilities requires a consistent and systemic approach. To build an inclusive society, we can't treat disability issues as merely disability issues alone. We must see them as whole of society issues, which require whole of society approaches and solutions. And this involves different parts of the government coming together, as Minister mentioned, the private sector being on board, and individuals taking action on inclusivity. There are many ways to go about creating an environment where persons with disabilities are empowered to to chase their dreams and to pursue their aspirations, achieve their potential, and participate as integral members of our society. Singapore's approach was to develop national roadmaps that we call the enabling master plans. These long-term master plans help us to guide the efforts of the government, the people sector, the private sector, individuals, and they outline broad strategies, policies, and initiatives, and they are developed together with persons with disabilities across all areas of life. And this includes areas such as inclusive employment, living spaces, transport, public spaces, sports, and many more. We are now in Singapore on our fourth master plan, the Enabling Master Plan 2030. Each master plan builds on the progress that we have achieved in the previous master plans. In the Enabling Master Plan 2030, we have reached a stage where persons with disabilities, their family members, government, and other stakeholders are committed collectively, and we have set measurable targets to be achieved by 2030. For instance, we aim to achieve an employment rate of 40% for persons with disabilities by 2030, up from 30% that we see today. As we implemented support measures for persons with disabilities and their employers and worked to remove barriers in the wider environment, we did so with three broad principles in mind. First, we ensured that our policies and programs across government included disability where relevant. Second, we support not just persons with disabilities, but also the communities around them to effect change. Third, we seek to change mindsets and promote buy-in to disability awareness and inclusion. I will illustrate this systemic approach through the example of employment. First, it is important to include disability perspectives and dimensions in policies and programs across the whole of government so that their needs and views are considered. For example, we recognize that some lower-wage persons with disabilities require additional support to meet their daily expenses and to save for retirement. As such, we designed our Workfare Income Supplement scheme with persons with disabilities in mind. By the way, the Workfare Income Supplement is a broad-based income supplement that we provide to lower-income workers to help them save for retirement. Under the Workfare Income Supplement, persons with disabilities receive the highest tier cash and Central Provident Fund or CPF quantum, the CPF being Singapore's Social Security Savings Scheme, funded by contributions from both employers and employees. We adopt the same approach in the Code on Accessibility in the Built Environment, which sets out essential accessibility requirements. We made sure that the code covered the needs of all groups who require accessibility provisions. That includes persons with disabilities, mothers, seniors, so that the built environment is accessible to everyone. In doing so, the built environment ceases to be a barrier to employment. Instead, it becomes an enabler where persons with disabilities, including those who are mothers or older persons, can fully access public buildings and workplaces. Second, besides providing direct support to persons with disabilities, we must also enable others who can in turn support persons with disabilities. In the context of employment, this includes employers and colleagues. To support inclusive employment, we provide a wage subsidy called the Enabling Employment Credit to employers of persons with disability. This incentivizes employers to hire persons with disabilities as they receive a wage subsidy of up to 20% for hiring persons with disabilities, with an additional 10% for hiring those who have not been employed for at least 6 months. Many co-workers are also open to working with persons with disabilities, but they may lack the capabilities or confidence to do so. This is why beyond funding training for persons with disabilities, we also fund courses and workshops for co-workers to build the skills and confidence to work with their colleagues with disabilities. Third, we need to create a society where disability inclusion is a norm rather than the exception. To do this, we need to promote positive attitudes, mindsets, and behaviors towards persons with disabilities. In the area of employment, we do so through initiatives such as the Enabling Mark, which is a national level accreditation framework that recognizes organizations for disability inclusive employment. One of its goals is to inspire employers to adopt best practices in building an inclusive workforce through the role model of organizations that have received the Enabling Mark. Through the experiences of Enabling Mark organizations, companies can then see firsthand how hiring persons with disabilities lead to a stronger organizational culture and eventually stronger organizational performance. Building on our existing efforts, we are also introducing a new initiative this year, the Enabling Business Hubs. These hubs that will be set up in different communities across Singapore will demonstrate how inclusive employment practices can be implemented across different industries and help companies implement these practices. These include, for instance, redesigning jobs so that tasks can be done by persons with disabilities and using technology to enhance productivity. Employment for persons with disabilities who work is key to securing economic security. It also provides many non-tangible benefits, from higher self-confidence and self-worth to a sense of identity and purpose. But getting persons with disabilities gainfully employed is also a Herculean and long-drawn task. Singapore has made some strides, but there is still much room for improvement. However, setting long-term goals and recommendations to be implemented through the enabling master plans has helped anchor progress on employment. And adopting a whole-of-society approach is a good step towards ensuring that barriers to employment can be systematically overcome. After all, it is only when different stakeholder groups within society comes together can we truly achieve a more inclusive and caring society for everyone. With that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary. That was excellent. I'm now going to turn to Alicia Ram, who is the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister at Employment and Social Development Canada, focused on income security and social development. Over to you.
Thank you, Krista. I want to acknowledge that I am stepping into very large metaphorical shoes, in stepping in for Minister Carla Qualtrough. And so not only am I following two very distinguished speakers, I have already disappointed you simply by stepping up to the mic. But it does make me feel very, very honored to be on this panel. And I do want to, again, share the Minister's own personal disappointment at not being able to be with us today. And I will speak a little bit later on as to why she can't be with us today, and there is a good reason. Also, I really wanted to take a moment and thank all the people who have been working really, really hard, often behind the scenes, to make it possible for all of us to be here today, not just at this side event, but also all the other great events going on around COSP. It's really inspiring to see the community kind of come together, to see all of you and be able to speak with you and learn more about what we need to do collectively to improve the conditions for persons with disabilities. And I am really looking forward to hearing from you after we all finish talking to you. So we know that persons with disabilities around the world have shown a tremendous amount of resilience over the last few years, particularly in the context of the pandemic and the ongoing recovery. We've seen the impact of cost of living increases, of course, and the effects of Russia's war in Ukraine. And these events are coming together and weighing heavily on labor markets and increasing barriers to labor market inclusion for persons with disabilities. So the inclusion of persons with disabilities in every part of society, at home, abroad, and across the world continues to be a big priority for Canada. And this is why I'm so excited to be here today and share the developments on what we are doing in Canada, as well as hear from panelists and also hopefully from you about your experiences and key developments taking place around the world. And it is exactly in these forums that we have the opportunity to have such a rich dialogue with other member states, with civil society organizations, and with persons with disability themselves. And we welcome and appreciate the tremendous increase in inclusion that we have seen at the UN, and as well as other international tables. This is something that Canada has been pushing for, and we're very, very pleased to see the progress that's being made here. So the Government of Canada has recently launched the first ever Disability Inclusion Action Plan. And this action plan is a blueprint that will chart a course for the Government of Canada to help reduce poverty among persons with disabilities, including youth, to help more persons with disabilities access and maintain and progress in employment, to create more inclusive spaces and communities, and develop a clear and consistent approach to disability inclusion. This action plan has 4 pillars of action, including financial security, employment, accessible and inclusive communities, and a modern approach to disability. This will include a new financial support for persons with disabilities, an employment strategy, and a new process to determine eligibility for federal government programs for persons with disabilities. And a cornerstone of this work is our new Canada Disability Benefit. This will be a benefit for working-age persons with disabilities that will be a supplement to existing federal, provincial, and territorial benefits that exist today. And this benefit reflects the fact that poverty is a systemic challenge for persons with disabilities that has only been made worse by the pandemic and the rising cost of living that has followed. This year in Canada, we saw the groundbreaking legislation for the new benefit that received unanimous support by the Parliament and passed with amendments by the Senate. And Minister Qualtrough is back in Ottawa today to respond to those amendments in the House and with the objective of seeing the Act pass into law this summer, which is very, very exciting for all of us. In our Canadian context, at the federal level, we have a number of broad-based programs that support children and seniors that capture persons with disabilities in those stages of life. But we don't have anything targeted at people with disabilities at the working age. This area of responsibility has largely fallen to provinces and territories under their jurisdiction. However, what that means is that there is a complex patchwork of approaches across Canada. Each province and territory has their own approach, their own definition, their own processes, and this is leading to a lack of coherence across our country. So our approach, which is to pursue framework legislation for establishing the benefit and then sorting out the details through regulations, will allow us to engage meaningfully on the design of the benefits with persons with disabilities themselves, and also engage with our provincial and territorial colleagues to ensure that the way that the benefits interact with the program that they offer ensure that people are better off overall. In the supportive measure under the employment pillar of the Disability Inclusion Action Plan in December, the government launched a Disability Inclusion Business Council. And this council is made up of business leaders from a wide array of sectors across the country who are dedicated to promoting cultural change and disability inclusion in the workplace. This council will provide advice on a pan-Canadian vision to improve the inclusion of persons with disabilities in Canadian businesses and workplaces, including recommendations on how to better support businesses in improving disability inclusion and creating an independent, self-governed disability business framework. In addition, the Government of Canada, closer to home, has also released and is implementing the accessibility strategy for the Public Service of Canada. So we're also looking into our own home to ensure that we're doing the right things. We want to have a public service that is representative of the public that we serve, and where everyone can contribute and succeed to the full potential. And to this end, the government has set a goal of hiring no fewer than 5,000 persons with disabilities by 2025. And we will ensure that these new recruits, as well as current employees with disabilities, are properly supported in the workplace. And with this in mind, we have a centralized enabling workplace fund that was established in order to invest in innovative and experimental projects to help remove accessibility barriers and improve workplace accommodation practices in our public service. We've also implemented the historic Accessible Canada Act, which was adopted in 2019 and sets an aspirational goal of having a barrier-free Canada by 2040. And in the spirit of nothing without us, the government has been engaging with the disability community from the beginning of the process and throughout the development of the action plan, as well as on the new benefit. And the disability community will continue to be engaged throughout the implementation process to ensure that their voices are heard. This engagement has included persons with disabilities, organizations that represent them, independent experts, and service providers. And the government has provided targeted funding to support community-led engagement on the action plan to ensure that the voices of persons with disabilities who have lived experience and are directly impacted continue to be heard. We strongly believe that the engagement of youth with disabilities is a crucial component of the development of effective, inclusive, and sustainable policies, programs, and initiatives. Youth have faced particular financial instability and have experienced fewer job opportunities during the pandemic, particularly those who not only experience disabilities, but also other intersectional backgrounds. And it's particularly important that youth with disabilities are included in decision-making spaces. And we'll be hearing shortly from one of our youth delegates in order to bring their perspective to this table. Under the employment pillar of the action plan, there are also measures to help youth with disabilities to find and keep good jobs, advance in their careers, or become entrepreneurs. This includes measures to make our workplaces more inclusive and accessible through the workplace stream of our Enabling Accessibility Fund. And the work on employment is very much connected to the disability benefit I spoke to earlier. The approach that we are taking recognizes that addressing poverty has to be a multi-pronged strategy. The benefit will provide stability of income to persons with disabilities, but as we've heard, work isn't always appropriate for everyone. And we also want to ensure that we are not creating any inadvertent disincentive to people taking on and succeeding in employment. We know that persons with disabilities have a significant untapped potential that is critical to our economy in filling labor market gaps. There is tremendous opportunity now to capitalize on economic conditions to really make progress, and it is a critical moment to address this persistently challenging issue. There is also a need to ensure that the systems and services that our government provides are built together as a whole and are truly inclusive. And only then can we afford or provide meaningful opportunities for persons with disabilities to fully participate in society, in the economy, and ensure security and social inclusion for all. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from our other panelists today about their work and engaging in a truly fruitful exchange of ideas with everyone here from around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And I'm now going to turn to Rebecca Coakley, who is a disability rights activist and public speaker, and she works with the Office of the President at the Ford Foundation. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Coakley. I have the pleasure of being the first U.S. disability rights officer to be housed at any U.S. foundation. I joined the Ford Foundation in 2021, and hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have moved over $40 million to the disability rights and justice communities here in the U.S. I also happen to be a person with a disability. And I think that's really important because if we're going to use the terminology of nothing about us without us, I look forward to the day I see a panel of all disabled people up here. So we're coming for your jobs. I'm not laughing. Okay, I am. I want to thank the Canadian Mission for having us here today. This is a wonderful opportunity and luckily happens to be quite literally just in our backyard. So it was really convenient to be over here today. And I want to thank all the folks doing this phenomenal work during this last week of COSP. Previously, I served in the Obama administration where I had the pleasure of being in charge of diversity outreach for the Obama White House. And one of the things that the president used to say quite frequently was that people are policy. It matters who's at the table. And yet we know when it comes to people with disabilities, we frequently are not at the table. And there's a number of reasons why, whether it be the issues around raising expectations, whether it be systemic ableism and discrimination, whether it be the fact that we also know that we're at the table, but we're not counted. And with that, I actually want to take a moment and welcome all the people with disabilities and chronic illnesses in the room. and who have joined us virtually. Our movement is infinitely stronger because you're part of it, whether or not it is safe for you to publicly self-identify professionally or personally. It matters, and I'm really happy that you're all here with us. So unlike 80% of people with disabilities, I'm part of the 20%. I grew up with parents with the same disability that I had. And so there was never a question about, was I going to go to college or was I going to have a job? My mom worked at a college. And so every time I had to go to work with her, I set foot on a college campus. And it really clearly set expectations for me from the beginning about what my career path would look like. My father ran a disabled people's organization, a Center for Independent Living. And so I watched firsthand as he worked with people with various levels of significant disabilities, getting the accommodations they need, being able to access home care, being able to live a life of dignity, fully included and immersed in their communities, being able to go to college, being able to fall in love. These were all things that were realities and were goals for the people that I was surrounded with for most of my life. However, that's not the case for most people with disabilities. We know that people with disabilities make up the majority of low-wage workers. We know that people with disabilities face some of the highest abuse and neglect rates around the world. We know, for instance, here in the United States, 50% of individuals who are killed by law enforcement are people with disabilities. So much work continues to need to be done. The Ford Foundation is very much committed to this work. And one of the phrases that our CEO uses quite frequently is the importance of embracing risk and reflecting honesty. And we know that even today, less than 2% of philanthropic funding goes to the disability community here in the US. Less than 2 cents for every $1,000 goes to the field of disability. And among that, while 94% of funding from philanthropy goes towards services, only 6% go towards disabled people's organizations and the issues of disability rights and disability justice. So while it's really great that folks want to take care of us, we actually really want our rights. In 2019, we saw that the top 10 funders provide more than 4 out of $5 for people with disabilities, specifically around issues of social justice, with 90% of it going to the US and 10% globally, which obviously dramatically needs to change. In 2015, when our CEO came on board, he was very public in the Ford Foundation's commitment to the field of justice. And to my friends in the room, I know this will not surprise you. He talked about gender justice. He talked about racial justice. He talked about LGBT justice. He talked about immigrant justice. He talked about economic justice. It was what we in the disability community like to say is ABD, not all but dissertation, but all but disability. And so in true grassroots disability community fashion, we trolled him on the internet, rather epically. And unlike most major CEOs, Darren Walker invited us in to talk to him. He admitted that he had had very little exposure to the disability community, even less exposure to the issues facing people with disabilities today. He was one of the many that believed that because the ADA was in place, that we were all taken care of. It was all good. The work was done. And we know that that's far from the case. And so from that day forth, Darren committed the Ford Foundation's resources across its existing programs of work and through a commitment directly from the President's office to driving change in the field of issues facing people with disabilities. And so what that's looked like is the creation of a President's Council on Disability Inclusion and Philanthropy, which brings together 17 foundations committed to funding a disability inclusion fund that works with grassroots disability rights and justice organizations. That's committed over 65 foundations to committing to a pledge, committing to making disability grants, committing to hiring people with disabilities in a multitude of roles, and committing to driving the change much that is needed to help support the growing movement of people with disabilities in the US and globally. That still wasn't enough. And so they reached out and said, and gave me a phone call, and they said, we would be very interested in you coming on board to helm a disability rights fund at the Ford Foundation. And so we actually had a long conversation about what that needed to look like. And when I came on board, the first thing we did was we asked disabled people, what should we fund? And the number one thing they asked us to fund was healthcare. I move about $10 million a year. $10 million a year is not going to fix the US healthcare system. I wish it would. Maybe we could get a cloning machine and multiply that a few more times, and we could actually see some significant impact. But what we learned in digging deep with our colleagues in the disability community was it wasn't just fixing healthcare, it was how do we disconnect healthcare, disability, and a life of poverty? Why is it that people with disabilities are forced to have less access to choice than our non-disabled peers? That seems extremely wrong. And I remember talking to one of the young men who was part of our listening session, and he told us about how he had received a full scholarship to Harvard Law School. He was a young man with a significant disability. He used a wheelchair, and he required 16 hours of home care a day. Massachusetts would only give him 5 hours of home care. So he actually had to turn down a full ride to Harvard Law School and go to a perfectly well-funded, strong in-state law school, which he got his law degree at. But is he doing as well as he would have done with a Harvard Law School education and $0 of law school debt? Hardly. Nobody without a disability is forced to make that choice. Yet people with disabilities and their families are on a daily basis forced to make choices that non-disabled people don't even have to think about. That is not equality. And so what we decided to focus on was that very issue. How do we disconnect the disability experience from one of poverty? From how do we make that connection around healthcare and that everyone should have access to healthcare? People with disabilities should not have to decide between, do I have a job or do I have health insurance? Do I eat or do I have health insurance? No one should be forced to make some of those decisions. The second focus of our work is on building the field of the next generation of disability legacy organizations and disability leaders. The third piece is around how do we change the narrative? We are tired of asking for jobs and being told that what's available to us is food, filth, fetching, folding, filing, flowers, festive, and friendly. We want y'all's jobs. We don't just want retention. I was very happy to hear you talk about retention. We want promotions. We want to move from the mailroom to the boardroom, and we deserve it, and we have the qualifications and the education to be able to do so. So that is our expectation. And the last piece is how do we continue to move philanthropy in the right direction moving forward? And the key of this really is that the ADA and related legislation really is the floor. It's not even a ramp, it's flat. There's no ascent. We have to drive further, faster, harder, more boldly, and actually transform the systems that are set up to keep disabled people and their families poor and without the right to make decisions for themselves. When you look at the economic status of people with disabilities, I'm going to share my CEO's favorite factoid, which is over 1/3 of GoFundMes in the United States are targeting a non-insured disability-related expense. How is this any different than the charitable telethons of previous days? We have people with disabilities being forced to share their most intimate details, the sob stories of their lives, to be able to have to beg for money, to acquire a new wheelchair, to have a ramp put at a house, to get an augmentative communication board so that you can communicate for yourself, where these things should just be provided as part of the dignity of being a human being. We're working with an organization called the Century Foundation, who's one of our grantees, which has pulled together the Disability Economic Justice Framework, which has pulled together over 40 anti-poverty organizations in the United States with over 40 disabled-led organizations to commit to driving solutions for poverty that center disability from the beginning. Because we know firsthand that if you center the issues of people with disabilities from day one, it lifts everyone, whether it be people who are formerly incarcerated, whether it be people who are low income, whether it be individuals in the foster care or the juvenile justice system. Centering disability promotes a universal design for policy that improves the lives of all marginalized communities. We also actually funded disabled economists because the data that we needed was not out there, because non-disabled people weren't thinking about us, because the current status of economic data, particularly around when equal pay day is for women in the US and globally, is not inclusive of people with disabilities, because we would have to acknowledge the fact that it is legal in the US and many other countries to pay disabled people less than minimum wage. And so what does it mean when you talk about equality for everyone and you have a little asterisk at the bottom and it says at the bottom of the page, except for disabled people who are going to pay $2.15 a week? We know that families with disabilities live with over at least $17,000 in additional annual expenses compared to families without people with disabilities. We call it in the disability community, we call it the CRIP tax, because it is the tax that is applied to us, and that can play out in a multitude of ways. So what are we suggesting in terms of change, and what are we hearing from disabled people among our grantees about what needs to be different? We need to eliminate the sub-minimum wage. It's beyond time. Everybody keeps talking about inflation and the need for people to save money. Do you know who can't save money? Disabled people. People with disabilities on supplemental security income cannot have more than $2,000 in a bank account without risking the loss of their health care. Why is it that we're not allowed to save? Don't we want people to save? Don't we want people to save for the status of the global economy? And yet there are policies in place that fundamentally prohibit the saving of money by disabled people and their families. Marriage equality passed in the US several years ago. Marriage equality has not yet come to people with disabilities, because if you get married, your economics are joined, and you will once again lose your health care. So lose your health care or lose your spouse. That is not the kind of choice that anyone should have to make. Medicaid expansion. You should be able to move anywhere in the country and have the baseline set of benefits and supports that you need without having to risk them. A disabled worker tax credit. What are the additional expenses that disabled people have in order to go to work? I'm really tired of having to spend twice as much on my wardrobe as all the rest of y'all on this panel, because I buy my clothes and then I have to go to a tailor and have them take it in, which often actually doubles or triples the cost of my clothing. But I work at a foundation. I can't exactly go to Kids R Us and buy a wardrobe. And so what are those expenses that keep people with disabilities from being able to work, being able to have the kind of jobs that they deserve, that they're qualified for? And how do we shift policy to adapt to that? Currently in the US, the Small Business Administration does not include people with disabilities as a qualified category of entrepreneurs for minority small business loans. Yet we know that people with disabilities have a robust desire to be entrepreneurs, but the startup capital is not available to us. We also need, frankly, tangible enforcement of our rights. I keep hearing about changing attitudes. I'm beyond changing attitudes. We actually need tangible enforcement. The number of times I watch people say on the internet, well, can't you just call the ADA? So some of us may have actually bought an 800 number. That's like 1-800-CALL the ADA. That's not it, but because we're so tired of people saying, well, can't you just call the ADA and get it fixed? And I say, no, there's not an app for customer service ninjas that I can just hit when I'm being discriminated against and see customer service agents fall out of the sky on ropes like Tom Cruise in the latest Mission Impossible movie and enforce my rights. Like, that would be really great. Instead of getting ADA Force, sadly, we got Space Force. We have over 10,000 people in the US alone die every year waiting for access to benefits, waiting for that redetermination to come through. That is beyond inexcusable. So it's not about economics or charity. It's really about justice. It's about the dignity of disabled people. It's about the right to make choices for ourselves. It's about the fact that our work is not the entirety of our worth and our value. It's about needing to dismantle systemic ableism and move towards a model of enforcement of the rights of people with disabilities. It's about actually having the same access to choice as all the rest of you non-disabled people have. Because every morning, every family I know that include a person with a disability do not make a choice, do not make a decision without thinking about how will this impact our access to services, how will this impact our access to health care, how will this impact our lifestyle going forward. And no one else has to make those kinds of choices. You know, the last thing that I would really leave you with is when we also know what works. The pandemic was actually a positive in some ways for disability employment. The two largest indicators of, two largest improvements in disability employment since the passage of the ADA in 1990, the first is Medicaid expansion, which we see increases disability employment upwards of 10%. And the second was telework during the pandemic. The ability to just be able to access your work from wherever you are, to have your accommodations, to be able to access a bathroom that works for you, to be able to access your disability-related equipment. We actually saw disability employment increase by 25% in the US during the pandemic because of the access of telework. And I like to say that this was one of those moments that non-disabled people sort of Columbused something. We'd been asking for telework for over 30 years. And then all of a sudden when the global pandemic hit, oh, there's this thing. We've discovered it. It's called telework. And people like it. And we knew it was going to be rolled back because we live in a society grounded in ableism. And so now we're watching people with disabilities who are meaningfully, gainfully employed starting to lose their jobs because of workplace inflexibility, where previously this person had done their job to the highest of standards, meeting or exceeding expectations for the last 2 years, but all of a sudden we're just going to erase the last 2 years and pretend that that hasn't happened. The additional piece that I haven't heard anyone mention, here in the US at least, but we have 20 million newly disabled people due to long COVID. We have a fundamental responsibility to think about how we approach the long-term impact of long COVID differently than how we thought about the impact of HIV and AIDS, differently than how we've treated veterans when they've come back from military service with a multitude of disabilities. What are we doing to ensure that individuals with long COVID and their families have access to all the services and supports they need, have access to disability determination in a quick and qualified manner, have access to the services and supports, whether it be mental health, whether it be for traumatic, brain fog, whether it be for illnesses similar to myalgic encephalomyelitis or what used to be called chronic fatigue syndrome. We have to do better by these people. We have a moral and a fundamental and a legal responsibility to do so. And I would lastly just remind you all that, as I said at the top of this, making systems accessible for people with disabilities make them better for all the rest of you. So there is a vested interest from everyone in this space to think about and to center and to listen to the voices of people with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Our final speaker today is Carly Fox. She is one of 3 youth delegates that we have as part of our Canadian delegation this year. And I'm going to give the floor over to you, Carly.
Lovely. Thank you, Krista. Me? Perfect. So hi, everyone. My name is Carly Fox. My pronouns are she, her, elle, and I'm a queer, neurodivergent, and disabled young woman and disability advocate. I'm honored to be here today as a member of Canada's delegation, alongside our 2 youth delegates, Paula McDonald and Brandon Bowen, who are right behind me. I have about 10 minutes today to talk you through youth perspectives around disability-inclusive support systems, economic security, and employment opportunities. 3 very complex, important, and interconnected topics that really disproportionately impact disabled youth as we navigate the transition to adulthood. But before I get into that, a bit more about me to hopefully convince you to stay around a little bit longer and not go get good seats for your next event. As you can see, I have invisible disabilities, episodic physical disabilities / chronic illnesses, whatever you want to call them, and psychosocial disabilities that interact in weird and wonky ways, I'll be honest. I have ADHD, so I will follow this script very closely so I don't get off topic, and please, interpreters right behind me, let me know if I'm ever talking too fast. You can just hit me. As for my professional experience, I'm the Communications and Partnerships Director for the National Educational Association of Disabled Students, a cross-disability by and for organization supporting full access to post-secondary employment and education. And through Needs, I had the incredible opportunity this year to travel across my country and meet disabled student groups throughout Canada, thanks to generous government funding. Thank you, by the way. I'm also the international chair of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, an umbrella group of disabled persons organizations fighting for disability rights. Here, I've really been able to get into international disability rights and work alongside the generations of advocates and activists who fought for the very rights I was born with. So while I can only speak from my lived experience, a lot of what I'll say today is heavily influenced and shaped by all of the incredible people I've had the chance to work with and learn from. And while we're getting sappy, thank you for the opportunity to be back on the delegation and to speak today. Despite all of my jokes, it's not something I take lightly. So hopefully that convinced you to stay, so I will get right into it. It can be difficult untangling support systems, employment opportunities, and economic stability from each other because they're so interconnected. But I'm going to do my best to unpack them, and I promise I'll try to put them back together at the end. I'll start with employment opportunities because that's what a lot of us start thinking about disability, especially our own government. Sorry, I had to. Now, I hope we all have a pretty good understanding of the systemic barriers disabled people face to employment, from inaccessible job forms to straight-up discrimination. So I want to expand on that and really explore how youth experience and navigate these barriers to employment. When we often think about youth employment, we think about first jobs, volunteering, and internships. Now, any form of unpaid labor is problematic, especially for disabled people who face disproportionate costs due to their disability. Unfortunately, volunteering is a really good way to gain relevant work experience, especially when disabled youth face barriers to getting their first paid job. But to volunteer, you often need economic stability. See how everything's kind of tangled? And all too often, disabled youth are expected to take on these unpaid roles because it's good experience. But I can't say for college or for a house with good experience. And that's all without even mentioning how people labeled with intellectual and developmental disabilities are often put in unpaid volunteer positions as a form of so-called social inclusion, when it's actually just economic exclusion. Entry-level jobs for youth are usually restricted to retail, services, and childcare. And these jobs are often minimum wage, insecure, and inaccessible. While every disabled person is different and can thrive in different environments, these minimum wage jobs often lack the accountability and oversight needed for accessible and inclusive workspaces. And of course, our minimum wage isn't livable, even for non-disabled people who don't have to deal with the hidden costs of disability. We don't generally have guaranteed sick pay, disability leave, maternity leave in these positions, especially if someone is only able to work part-time. Because of entry-level jobs and accessibility, disabled youth often have less work experience or lower quality work experience than their disabled peers, and this has a serious snowball effect, not to be a Canadian and bring snow into things. Thanks for laughing. So as our non-disabled peers build their resume and get promoted, disabled youth still have issues getting in the door, sometimes literally. If we want to improve disabled people's participation in our workforce and increase their representation in higher paid roles, we need to start at the start and ensure these entry-level jobs are accessible and inclusive spaces for disabled youth to start their careers. We can't only help the disabled workers who are able to get jobs, we need to go to the root causes of unemployment for disabled people, which is inaccessibility and discrimination from the employers and inadequate services diminishing human capacity potential. And that brings us to support systems. Support systems mean different things to different people, and they look different as a result. Now, I won't lie, I never considered government programs a part of support systems until I got the event concept note, but I like it, because we need supports to support systems. I hope I didn't lose you there. Because individuals alone can't fix inaccessibility and ableism, we need systemic change. And disabled people need accessible housing, accessible transportation, accessible health services, all of these good, important things to live in and participate in society. And this really connects to employment and economic stability, because how can you work a job if you can't get there? How can you apply for a job if you don't have a permanent residence? But unfortunately, most available programs and services for disabled people don't anticipate youth using them. And even more unfortunately, our medical system often discriminates against people with chronic illnesses based on age. You ever hear, you're too young to look sick? Now, I hate the medical model as much as the next person, but until I don't need a diagnosis to access government programs and funding, it's worth talking about. because there's still so much stigma against youth navigating medical care that it prevents our access to life-saving treatments and life-saving programs, especially for femme, poor, and racialized youth. Luckily, there's an easy solution already underway. We dropped the medical model. The 2019 Accessible Canada Act sets out the social model of disability, so it's time the government aligns its programs and policies with its own legislation. Easier said than done, I know. And that brings us back to government programs supporting support systems. When you have a functioning support system and access to meaningful employment, you're often able to enjoy economic security. And economic security, more often than not, allows for and facilitates physical and emotional security. Because economic security isn't everything, but it sure does impact everything. But unfortunately, most youth don't experience economic security until they're full-grown adults. And too many disabled people won't experience economic security at all. And this is normalized in our society. Youth and disabled adults are often expected to take up the insecure, part-time, minimum wage work that makes our economy go round. But that work's not enough to pay the bills, and that causes a lot of distress, which in turn impacts all kinds of well-being. And this lack of economic security also prevents adequate saving, as we discussed earlier, which is really helpful when you have an unpredictable condition. So remember when we discussed disabled youth who often can't get inaccessible entry-level jobs? Let's go back to them. Let's say they still weren't able to find jobs, or they somehow did, but it put immense stress on their well-being, and it still didn't actually pay the bills, so they had to quit. Or they were fired because of their disability, and their employers got away with it due to that lack of oversight. So they applied to their provincial or territorial disability support program. Now we're back at the support system. Jokes aside, this is a dehumanizing process where a non-disabled person controls the resources and makes you prove just how disabled you are. And if you're approved, you aren't given enough money to live off of. You're actually given less than the value of the provincial poverty line. And that is certainly less than rent and groceries combined. And if you are somehow able to access work so you can try to pay for both rent and groceries, you'll see clawbacks. And don't even think about getting married, because then you could lose your disability support and its associated programs. Our current provincial and territorial disability support programs freeze disabled people where they are, and they don't allow for economic security or well-being in any of its forms. This is a reality for countless Canadians and people with disabilities around the world. Luckily, direct cash transfers have been shown to drastically improve economic outcomes for people with disability. And as we discussed, I am proud to report Minister Qualtrough was in Ottawa fighting for Bill C-22 to get those cash transfers going. So we need more than just direct cash transfers. So how do we fix all of this? We empower disabled people and their representative organizations through funding and capacity building to redesign support systems and employment programs to be more accessible and disability inclusive. Disabled people know the barriers they face to employment and economic security better than anyone. In other words, disabled people know disability better than anyone, and I can't believe I still have to say that. There's no substitute for lived experience. There's no textbook that tells you what it is like to be disabled, because being disabled is an identity, it's a community, and it's a worldview. Canada prides itself on being a multicultural, diverse, and accepting country, and I want to believe that. I'm proud to be up here and to represent my country, and I'm proud of the progress we've made both domestically and internationally, not over the last few years, but the past few decades. But if we want to become what we think we are, we need to start seriously funding disabled persons organizations. We need to promote disabled people in all sectors up to high-level decision-making positions of power. We need to ensure all government programs are accessible, not just the disability-specific ones. That work is underway. There are pushes in government, but we need to keep pushing. And we need to let disabled people lead, and not just on disability, but on everything. Because we are everything. We are everywhere, and we are not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you to all of our speakers today. What a fabulous panel we've had, and I've done a very bad job at moderating because we're over time, but I think we do have a bit more time that we can take some questions if people would like to. Excellent. And forgive me that I can't read this here and far away. I'm going to start in the far back corner. If you don't mind putting your... Can we just get the microphone on at the very back there?
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Lauren Farovich. So I am the director and the founder of a nonprofit organization known as Global Deaf Research Institute. It's amazing watching all of your presentations. I'm really proud to see the Canadians here and all the wonderful work that you're doing related to disabilities. I did have a question. It's a bit of a tough one, I will say, but I'm just wondering if you have any strategies in place looking into the funding as well, because you mentioned that only 6% of funding is going to organizations that are disability owned. And I'm just wondering, are you looking into all the individual aspects for different types of disabilities, for example, mental or neurodivergence, deafness, deafblindness, those who use wheelchairs? Do you have any strategies on approaching the specific needs of these very nuanced and niche disabilities and how to approach those?
Thanks. I'll just turn to my panelists here if anybody wants to take Rebecca or anybody.
This is Rebecca Coakley. As it refers to our grant-making budget, we actually collect disability data through, there's an organization that collects grant-making data across a multitude of diversity categories. And it is broken, it does have additional breakdowns in terms of types of disability. I don't have that data privy to me at this particular moment, but I can follow up with you and get you additional information.
Really quickly, for me, and I'm not a policy expert, I am literally just out here as a youth, but for me, it's important to let them empower the most marginalized to lead. When we let them lead, things become more accessible for everyone, and to really, really empower cross-disability allyship and social justice. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. I see in the far back corner over here.
Children and Young People with Disabilities Australia. I really like your speech about young people. My question to you is, how do we get young people at the table in terms of boards and other areas of society, and what do you think the solutions are, and how can Canada influence other countries like Australia? Thank you.
Don't take all of them. I have this really fun thing I do called reverse imposter syndrome. So with, traditional imposter syndrome, it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a failure. I'm a fraud. And when I'm a youth, a lot of the time I have what I call reverse imposter syndrome. It's like, I'm definitely not supposed to be here, but no one's going to call me out on it. So I'm just going to keep doing this because no one's going to speak up. So honestly, apply, because we are so qualified. I've realized a lot of disabled youth, we start our careers early because we know we have to overcompensate. And especially for women, for racialized people, for disabled people, we are always overcompensating. I say I apply for jobs the way a white man applies for jobs. I assume I am qualified for everything. And it works, it really does. And another thing is to just connect with other disabled youth, because basically the older generation of disability advocates, they know their time's kind of running out, and they are looking for youth. They are looking for mentors and mentees to build the next generation. So truly just try to get in, see if they stop you. That's my answer.
Actually, I would jump in on that and say one of the things that we do with our grantees is we actually ask them about the makeups of their board of directors. And I make a point of asking, what is the bench for the next generation of young disabled leaders? How are they integrated into your organization? What does it look like for people with significant disabilities? We fund an organization called Communication First, which is the first US-based organization for individuals who use augmentative communication boards to talk. I remember when I would talk about that to other funders, and they're like, but they can't speak. And I was like, that doesn't mean they can't communicate. And here's like 10 members of their organization that you should have on your board. And so, part of it is really having the importance of collecting the data, because one of the things that I've learned as a funder is if we ask people for data, they actually will move more swiftly and more robustly to comply and be thoughtful about who isn't at the table and who do they need to be recruiting.
Excellent. So I'm told we have time for about 3 questions before we get kicked out of the room, so I apologize. I'm going to start here. Please go ahead.
you. This is Gaudence from the Commonwealth Disabled People Forum as women's representative officer. I was excited to hear from different stories, good policies, strategies, all promoting economic empowerment for persons with disabilities. And my question here is to ask for underrepresented groups of people with disabilities. To what extent all those policies from Canada, Singapore, are you responding to the issues of people with deaf blindness? Are they accessing schools? Are they accessing workplaces? To what extent are they really supported to enter into workplaces, but also can sustain and can support themselves? Again, to what extent all those policies and strategies are responding to the issues of intersectionality, gender and disability, women and girls? To what extent are they really accessing and supported? To what extent all those recruitment process online? Today we're on a digital world. To what extent is this responding to specific issues of person with disabilities in different categories? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think it's really important. I guess I'll say two things. One is I think we are more and more aware of exactly those kind of issues, and we're trying to ensure that, at least the Canadian context, our approach takes account of that. And a big part of that is the nothing without us principle. I think for too long, and we've heard about it from some of our other speakers, a person without disability has been making all the decisions. That cannot continue, and a big part of that is not just making sure that there are tables like this, but at the decision-making tables when the time comes. The other thing I will say is we've got a long way to go. We've not really addressed this to the extent we need to. Very much hoping that in future conversation like this, somebody else is going to have a much better answer than the one I just gave you. But we're working on it.
I think that point about what works is really important in all of this. And, you know, what we are trying to do more and more in the United Kingdom is really understanding what interventions work most effectively, and then trying to provide a much greater level of tailoring that meets particular individuals' aspirations and needs, respecting the fact that everybody is different, that people's aspirations are different, and that actually, quite often, people's functional abilities vary despite the fact they may have the same disability or health condition, and we need to be really alive to that. And so things like Access to Work Plus are really about understanding the individual, working with them to understand what they'd like to achieve, and then crafting roles in response to that with an employer and with a disabled person. And, for example, I visited a supermarket in London last week, and there were a group of service users there, employees, who were being supported for access to work with British Sign Language. And it was fantastic to see just the transformational difference that support was providing in terms of opening up that work opportunity in a really supportive environment, which actually the other employees in the business love and feel a part of. They're brilliantly supported. It's good for business. But also it's the right thing to do, and that support is support that we are developing and that we're delivering in partnership with that business, with those disabled people, and that really underpins the principle of how we're trying to go about developing our support moving forward.
Yes, please.
I'll just make a quick point about my experience from Singapore. I think not just in terms of disability policies, but also in terms of poverty alleviation and many other issues across government. I think there needs to be two key ingredients. I think one is that of engagement, regular engagement and communication, as well as dialogue with people who are right in the thick of things. Along with me and my Singapore delegation is Joan. Joan, where are you? Yeah, at the back of the hall. She's a national goalball player. So when we talk about how we better support our para-athletes, right, we get on the ground. I play goalball with her. She's formidable. So I would not suggest to any one of you to play goalball with her. But I think that's the thing. We need to get right down to the ground in order for policies to be grounded in reality. That's one. Second, really, is about the need for us in the policy-making space to create or to leave some space for sandboxing, because you can't have one policy, solve all the problems of the world, right? So there needs to be some space that is left. Well, I call it a white space of sorts, a canvas that allows us to sandbox existing regulations, existing policies, existing rules, such that we can make for exceptions and for flexibilities around the edges. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think we increasingly, the needs of each family, of each individual is different. So if we have very broad stroke, one-size-fits-all policy, that's not going to work. Yeah.
Can I answer the data question on funding? I would tell you that in terms of our grant making out of my portfolio at the Ford Foundation, 70% of our funding has gone to women majority organizations, and of which also 60% have gone to BIPOC majority organizations. When you actually dig even deeper, 1/3 of that has gone to women of color-led organizations or women of color-led projects, because we strive to be consistent with the values of the disability justice movement.
I have the gentleman in front of me down here.
Thank you, panel. Another Australian here. I just wanted to raise this issue around supporting and properly resourcing DPOs, and to what extent do you think DPOs need to be properly resourced to pierce through the short-termism of governments that can last not for very long, when a lot of this work takes very long to achieve significant change? That's an issue that we face in the DPO that I head up policy and advocacy at. We are the cross-disability DPO, and we have governments successively trying to push different agendas. And 4 years are up, new government comes in, new priorities come in. So how do we properly resource DPOs to work with governments collaboratively and productively?
Thanks for that question. I'm going to turn to the panel, and I'm going to apologize. I know Minister Persgrove has to duck out for his next meeting, and this is going to have to be our last meeting. Everybody's giving me we're way over time. So I'm going to turn to the panel. If there's anybody that wants to make a quick intervention to respond, and then I think we're going to have to cut it off, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. If anyone has questions, please hunt me down after. I'm totally cool with that. I'm from DPO, so I'm really happy you answered that question. We need to fund them every single dollar they need. If we want to make our government barrier-free by 2040, I know the government's doing great, you're doing great work, and there's great people doing great stuff, but it's the DPOs that are leading. You come to us for the advice, and I know you pay us operational funding to get day-to-day operations going, but we need more to build that capacity, to build leadership, and we need money to go specifically to COSP so that we have more DPOs in this room to represent Canada. If that kind of answers your question.
Can I jump on that as well? This is honestly a true opportunity for philanthropy. I've been on the other side. I've been a grantee. I've had to hustle for government money before. And with that funding comes all the logical restrictions, or not so logical restrictions. I remember running an organization for youth with disabilities and being told that we couldn't talk about gender-based violence because nobody wanted to hear about people with disabilities in an intimate relationship. So we could instead talking about them making happy friends. That said, I do really strongly feel from the philanthropic side, this is why philanthropic engagement is so important. We really strive to provide a majority of our dollars, our general support dollars, that allow the flexibility for the organizations that we fund to do whatever they need to do with them. If it means hiring staff, if it means getting management training, if it means getting budgeting software. So much of disability-related funding is directly program-related and has so many restrictions that it actually doesn't allow organizations to build for the future and to actually anchor themselves in community and be around for 20+ years.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. What a great panel we've had, and thank you for your participation today.